Hello, everyone, and welcome to another titillating episode of Educational Assessment. I am your host, Professor DeNobile. This is episode 3, High Stakes and Standardized Tests. And today we're going to be looking at the normal curve, existing tests and how they're created, the difference between norm and criterion reference tests, the advantages and disadvantages of standardized tests, and then finally interpreting and reporting scores. I'm going to try to run through this as quickly as I can. This has a lot of meat to it, but I'm going to try to do it as quickly as I can. So we've already looked at some of these terms, but we're gonna look at them a little bit more in depth right now. So I'm going to focus on the right side, but the right and the left interact with each other. But achievement tests we've seen before, and achievement tests are what you have learned. That's what they test. What have the students learned? Did they meet the standards? How did they meet the standards? That is what an achievement test is. An achievement test is always at the end. Then you have aptitude tests, and with aptitude tests, measure our potential abilities. If you think of, for example, with college admission tests like the SAT, which is an aptitude test, what are the potential success in college? What skills do the students currently possess based off of this test that's going to measure their potential success in college? Or like the ACT is more of an achievement test because the ACT tests have you learned what you need to in order to be successful in college. There are international comparison tests, which we looked at in the last episode when we discussed a nation at risk, like the PISA and the TIMSS. How do we compare with the rest of the world? How do we line up or rank in terms of national preparedness on the global scale? And then there's a lot of psychological tests that will measure things like motor skills, communications, adaptive behavior. These are normally done by school psychologists. And one of the other major differences is that many of them, including those psychological tests, tend to be diagnostic tests to see, if a student has a disability, they have to be tested and then diagnosed with that disability in order for them to be labeled as a student with a disability and therefore get special education services. That's just one example. The other thing to keep in mind, just like anything else, these tests are subject to interpretation. So an intelligence test. Okay, great. Our student has an IQ of 120. Does that mean that they're a genius? Well, on paper. Does that mean something in the greater spectrum of things? Maybe, maybe not. So I think what we have to also keep in mind, while assessments are important, they are open to interpretation. And because they're open to interpretation, they're only as good as we use them. And as we said before, assessment drives instruction, and it's specifically to instruction. These tests, for example, do not define the worth of the students taking the test. I just wanted to put that out there, just so that it's said. And so we're going to now look at tests by developmental level. So in infancy, there is a question about the reliability and validity of these tests, but there's a lot of developmental scales, intelligence scales, communication and play that is tested at the infancy level. At the preschool level, there's a lot of screening. Screening is a broad overview of where a child is at, and there's a lot of diagnostic. Does the child have an issue let's say with reading or with listening or processing, that usually starts at the preschool level. So, like, for example, does the student have an issue with phonics? They have to take a diagnostic exam in order to see if they have an issue with phonics. And then at the school age, there's a lot of individual and group tests that are taken. The group tests are those norm reference tests. How do they compare to their peers? The diagnostic tests become less and less and less the older that the students become, because you want to diagnose them as early as possible. Now, does that mean that they may develop a disability later on? It's possible. It's possible that that may happen for whatever reason. So, for example, and I want to clarify what I mean there. Disabilities can come in different forms. Can a disability be created due to a traumatic experience? If a student has, let's say, a traumatic brain injury, they're now going to have a different type of disability than, let's say, something that is due to a genetic reason that they have a disability. So diagnostic exams become less and less and less because we want to make sure that we get them as early as possible so that they're addressed and they can get their needs taken care of as early as possible. This leads us now to test quality. The two major things that are important with test quality are reliability and validity. Now, reliability is the degree to which the test is stable or consistent. In other words, are the individuals who are taking the test, in this case students, are they consistently answering the same way each time? That will, and hopefully the correct, the established correct answers, that shows that there is a reliability within the test. Another way of looking at it is we're getting a mathematical understanding to a correlation. So different types of reliability tests include a test retest, a split half, an inter-rater, and alternate forms. I'm going to talk about different examples of those in a second. The reliability symbol is the alpha symbol, and we want alpha or reliability to equal 0.9 or higher. That says that there is a high or strong reliability within that test. The further you go down, 0.8 is moderate, 0.7 is low, 0.6 is unacceptably low, 0.5 is horrible in terms of reliability. We want our tests to be 0.9 or higher. So let's, for example, what's a split half reliability test? Well, let's say that I created an intelligence test. We're going to call it the DeNobile intelligence test. It's the DIT, the DeNobile intelligence test. And I'm going to test 1,000 students to take this test. And in this, there's 100 questions in the test, measuring some type of intelligence, right? Reading intelligence, listening intelligence, whatever the type of intelligence that I want to measure in my DeNobile intelligence test. So anyway, so I'm going to split that test in half, and I'm going to test the first 50 questions and the second 50 questions and look for that correlation alpha, that reliability, and I'm going to see, is there as close to 1 as possible for the first half and the second half of the test. That's what we would call the split half reliability test. Then there's the test retest. So I'm going to give them that same test, that DIT, let's say a month later. Maybe I'll mix up the answers, maybe I'll mix up the questions, but it's essentially the same test. And I'm going to compare the reliability of the first take to the retake. I want to see if those alpha scores are both 0.9 or above, regardless of when they take it. That's the test retest. Then you have the inter-rater, which is based off of a rubric. One of the examples is the EdTPA. In the EdTPA, you have written portions, you have a video, and scores for the EdTPA are calibrated with a rubric and compare their scores to the exemplar scores, exemplar written projects. And the hope is that the scorers who are scoring the EdTPA, that their scores match up with the scores that have already been established. In New York State, we have, as I said in a previous lecture, Regents exams. And for the English Regents, the English state exam, students have to write an argumentative essay and they have to analyze an excerpt from a work of literature. We have rubrics for both written portions that we have to calibrate as the scorers. We were given exemplar answers, and then we have to guess what score would we give this. And then as a group, we're trying to figure out, are we all in agreement that this response is a level 3 response? This response is a level 5 response. This response is a level 2 response. And if we can all agree that these exemplars equal that level, then when we're scoring the students who took the exam, we're hopefully going to be at the same score or within 1 point. If we're more than 1 point away, we get a third reader, and that third reader comes in and it helps reconcile any scores that are not the same. But that is called inter-rater reliability. Then we have validity. Validity is the degree to which the test serves the purpose for which it will be used. So, for example, does the student aptitude test, what's its validity score in measuring the aptitude of students? That would be an example of figuring that out. So there is criterion and predictive that is associated with aptitude test items that focus on skills related to future success. The example that I give here is the scatter plot on top. Shows freshman GPA and SAT verbal scores. And this shows a high positive correlation between the total SAT score. So as the SAT scores rise, the freshman GPA scores rise as well. So a high SAT score is a good predictor, a very strong predictor of a high GPA the student's freshman year. Then there's concurrent validity, and these relate items to another similar test, administering a similar test along with current to establish validity. So here's an example. We're going to go back to that DIT, that DeNobile intelligence test, and I'm going to test those 1,000 students. Well, I'm also going to test those same 1,000 students with the WISC exam, WISC, which is an established intelligence test. If the new test, the DIT, the DeNobile's intelligence test, if those scores match up and correlate strongly with the established test, in this case the WISC, we would say that it has high concurrent validity, and we can say therefore that DeNoble's intelligence test indeed measures intelligence, because when you score high on the DIT, you score high on the WISC. So they both correlate with one another. All right. So norm versus criterion-based criterion reference tests. So a norm reference, as we learned this before in the introduction lecture, but a norm reference provides information on how an individual performs compared to a group. They're broad in content. The items cover a wide range of difficulty. These help us place students in comparison to their peers. Where do they fall in a grade level? where do they fall within like if you're saying the grade or school, are they above or below grade level? That's what a norm reference test will give us. A criterion reference test provides information on how an individual performs in a standard or an objective. The focus is on mastery of specific objectives. It focuses on one grade level of difficulty instead of a broad range of difficulty. Both have their place, and we're going to talk about that soon. But with that said, can an assessment be norm and criterion referenced? If I had the Jeopardy music, I'd play the Jeopardy music right now. For dramatic effect, I'm just going to let that linger for a second. Can an assessment be norm and criterion referenced? And the answer is yes. So, for example, you have your Y-TOPS in Wyoming. There's the ACT exams where I'll put it this way. If an exam is norm referenced and it was written to be norm referenced, I'm not sure. I am 99% sure that 99% of them, if not all of them, would not be criterion referenced. However, a criterion referenced exam can be turned back to be norm referenced. So, for example, the ACTs measure did you learn the content of high school? That's what the ACTs measure. Did you learn the content of high school? And then you're ranked based off of how much did you learn from high school, based off of how the test is written. With that said, you could then be ranked based off of how everybody else, your peers, if you got a 28 on the exam, which is a very high score for the ACT, if you got a 28 on the exam, where do you rank compared to everybody else who took it that same year? So yes, criterion reference exams can also be norm referenced. I'm 99% sure that norm referenced exams, if they were written to be norm referenced, that they typically cannot be criterion referenced as well. But your criterion reference can also be norm referenced. When or for what purpose might you want to norm reference data? Well, if you want to compare an individual student to the group. Where should this student be currently in comparison to their peers? So let's say we're talking about walking, okay? An infant. When should an infant be walking? Now, we can do a test and we can compare them to their peers and say they should be walking by 18 months of age, let's say. They're 20 months and they're not walking yet. Well, what does that mean? I mean, we now the results are open to interpretation, and that's a very specific thing. Now let's move to, let's say, reading level. Where should they be? We have reading levels based on grade level. This is where the student should be. So that would be a norm referenced. That's where the norm reference data would be handy. Where should this student be currently in comparison to their peers? Criterion data is when you want to see where an individual student is in comparison to a standard or objective. Have they met objective requirements for graduation, for example? That would be an example. Criterion data is most helpful to us. Which now brings us to the normal curve. The normal or bell curve helps us understand where our students are. So here's an example on the left side here. Let's say we measured 500 American women. We measured their height. Well, as you can see, as we start plotting their heights, they start naturally falling into a bell curve where the mean is in the center. And in this case, the mean is 64.5 inches with a standard deviation of 2.5 inches. Don't worry. We're going to talk about what all of these mean, but all you need to know is that the results tend to land in a bell curve. Now, if we look at a blank bell curve, which is the one on the right, So this is a standard normal distribution of a bell curve. And as you can see, 68 to 95% of individuals should fall in the average range or slightly above or slightly below the average range. As you start going two standard deviations above or below, 4% of the population is either going to be gifted well above average, or having specific special needs well below average. This helps plan our instruction because, as we've said before, assessment drives instruction. So don't don't get anxious, don't get scared when you're looking at a bell curve. I'm going to talk a little bit in a little while about my anxiety with all of this because I'm not a numbers person, but it's important to simply understand the basic concepts of the bell curve. At the end of the day, all you need to know in a normal bell curve is that when you start plotting the results of a standardized exam, this is specific to a standardized exam. Your results theoretically should fall in this bell curve, where whatever is considered the average score, majority is going to land in that average range. And then you're going to see at the margins your gifted students, and then your, I'm just going to call them well below average students. Why does this drive instruction? Because now we see that our students in a given class now have needs. Ideally, we would want everyone to be gifted, but that's just not reality. Reality isn't that everyone's scoring in the 99 percentile. That's not reality. However, now that we see where they land on the bell curve, and again, I repeat, because this is very important, wherever they fall on the bell curve, if they're a below average student, that does not mean they're a below average person. And I know that may sound like obvious, like, yes, Professor DeNobile, we understand that. We're going to talk about it when we talk about interpreting the results. Students and parents in particular misunderstand when you're sharing results with them. We've grown into a culture where numbers mean everything. But the reality, and I mean this, wholeheartedly to a certain extent. The reality is that the numbers really mean nothing. So I'll give you an example. My juniors and seniors, they get so anxious. They get so, oh my God, the SATs. I need a perfect score on the SAT. No, you don't need a perfect score on the SAT. And if you get what's considered a low score on the SAT, that doesn't mean anything. What score do you need to get on the SAT? Well, what school do you want to apply to? You look up the school that you want to apply to, and then you look at what SAT score do I need for that school? Because then that's your score that you need. If you want to go to the University of Wyoming, you look up the University of Wyoming and you look up and you see what is the SAT score that the University of Wyoming needs. That's the score you need to get. You don't need to get the perfect score. Why? Are you going to go to the school that you need the perfect score? If that's the school you want to go to, then that's your goal. But what students think is, oh, but if I get a low SAT score, that means I'm a bad student or I'm a bad person. No, it doesn't. It just means you have to get better at taking the SAT. That's it. A low test score is specific to that test. It's not specific to that student. And I know that I'm very passionate about that because the kids tend to become overly obsessive about the number. And it's not about the number. It's about what we do with the results to impact our instruction, to impact their success later on. So some important terms. So we have, I need to shrink this. How do I shrink it? Because I have the definitions in my notes. Do I? Nope. Nope. I don't have the definitions in my notes. I left them on here. Okay. So we've already looked at the normal curve, the normal distribution. Just to reiterate it, the normal curve or normal distribution is the expected landing of the scores. When we plot them, this is where we expect them to land. Mean is M. That's the notation. Mean is M. That's the average. What is the average score? That's the mean. What's the mean score? Standard deviation, or SD, is how close or far the scores fall in relation to the mean score. Percentile rank or percentile is not the percentage score. You could score an 80% on a test, but your percentile is 95. The percentile means you scored 95% compared to your peers. You scored at a level 95% or higher compared to your peers. So this is where we kind of get confused sometimes with percentile rank. Percentile rank is not the score. Percentile rank is how you performed in comparison to your peers. Stenines, there's a chart on Canvas for you to look at, but Stenines means standard 9. It's a way to scale scores on a 9-point scale. Just like in a similar way, it's not exact, but your GPAs in college are on a 4-point scale. They're converted to a 4-point scale and then to a letter grade. But in a similar way, a Stenine is, we now have the scores. How can we now break them down into a 9-point scale? And then that Stenine score, it becomes another way of analyzing the data. Then you have standard scores, Z or T. A Z score is where the score lies on the bell curve. If the Z is a score of 0, it means it's exactly average. It's right in the middle. So it's not that you want to get to 0, but it lets you know how far or close away from the mean it is. It's another way of looking at the standard deviation. The T-score is the number of standard deviations from the mean. So let's say you do a T-test and it's got 1.28 T-score. It means it's 1.28 standard deviations from the mean score. That's all that it means. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm an English teacher. My head starts spinning with all of this stuff. My editor makes fun of me because she's like, statistics is not math. There's numbers. It's math. That's it. It's got to do with math. It's got numbers. That's all that matters to me. Don't worry too much. Understand the basics and understand what this is telling you. What's more important is when we get to the next part, which is interpretation, reporting and interpretation. So you need to know what these mean, but don't get lost in the fray and start freaking out because this is numbers. I hate talking about numbers. I'll even tell some of my students math is evil. Like it gives me anxiety sometimes, but don't worry, it's not as bad as it seems. The pros and cons, the advantages are mainly the development of standardized exams. They come with precise administration procedures. It's a quantifiable score. There's a difference between saying Johnny is on grade level. Okay, what does that mean? Well, Johnny's in 3rd grade and he's reading at a 3.2 reading level, which would be 3 years, 2 months. Okay, well, it's a quantifiable score. I can explain to you quantifiably with numbers what I mean by grade level. they're norm referenced, which means that they can be compared to groups. You can compare them to students in the same class, in the same school, in the same region, in the whole country, possibly even the whole world. So they're norm referenced in that way. They already come with a validity and reliability test. Teachers don't have to develop them. They come prepackaged. Disadvantages are the social emotional stuff associated with them, the misusage of them, and their linkage to accountability, like the effects of high stakes testing, the anxiety that's caused by them, the design limitations of the tests, including bias. We have seen over the years that some standardized tests do have embedded bias with them. The assessment of students with disabilities and Ls, they tend to score lower because they're not really, the tests aren't built for them. They're built for the quote unquote average student. Measurement limitations associated with the test, the effects on curriculum and instruction that you tend to teach to the test because of them, and the misapplication of the results. Just to go back to accountability, here's just another example. There was a brief time when your score was tied very closely. Your score as a teacher, your end of year evaluation was tied very closely to how your students scored. Well, let's say in a given department, we have 3 teachers in teaching 10th grade English. You have one teacher who teaches all of the honor students, one teacher who teaches the general education students, and then the third teacher teaches all of the students with disabilities. Let's just say that's how the program was done. Well, now we get to the end of the school year. The students take the state exam, and how do you think the scores are going to end up? But those 3 teachers are being held to the same standard. That becomes very unfair if you're going to link it to the teacher's evaluation. Of course, the honors teacher is going to get all the highest scores, and most likely, that's why I'm using my words precisely, most likely the teacher who's teaching all of the students with disabilities is most likely going to have all of the lowest scores. So it becomes unfair if you're going to link it directly to the teacher evaluation. Methods of reporting the test to the teachers. You're going to have an individual test record. So up here, this is just an example. Just so you know, these aren't actual reports. At some point, we may talk about laws associated to grades. I got this off of a manual. These are fitness tests, but this is just to show you that an individual test record here, these are test results for an individual student. This is Philip Acuna. This is a fake student that goes to Screaming. I would love to have gone to or teach at Screaming Eagle High School. I would love to see what their mascot looks like. That's Screaming Eagle High School. Just sounds like I would not want to be on an opposing team at homecoming. You know, we're the Screaming Eagles. What are you? You're the Penguins? Here we come. We're the Screaming Eagles. All right, but anyway, so here you have an individual test record, one student with all of their scores. Then you have a class report where you can see a list of different students within a given class. Then you have a grade level school report. So let's say this one on top. These are all of the students in PE grade 9. These are the students in grade 9 in multiple classes. Or this particular one, as it's written, this is how the entire grade fared. This was the average score for the entire grade. And then you have school level and district level reports and they can look like this. Then you also can have state level reports as well, like the state report cards. So these are just different ways of reporting for teachers. But what's important is how we report them to parents. As I said earlier, we need to explain the value and the limitations of the scores. We want to focus on percentiles and explain the difference between a percent score and the percentile score. Explain the use and the purpose of this particular test result. Because if you tell a parent that their student scored at the 30th percentile and they don't know what the purpose of that test was, that's going to freak them out. Well, what do you mean my child scored at the 30th percentile? Did you not do your job? Well, you have to go back and explain what the purpose of that test was and how and why that student scored at the 30th percentile. Be cautious of grade equivalence associated with, so for example, if a student is in the third grade and they took a reading test and it says that they're at 5.3, fifth grade, third month of the fifth grade, does that mean that we're gonna bump Johnny up to the fifth grade if they're in third grade? No, that's not what it means. First off, we need multiple tests in order to know where a student, we got to triangulate the data as it is, where we take multiple tests and we look at multiple scores to give the full picture of where they're at. And really, what some of these tests, like let's say Johnny's at 5.3, Susie is at 4.7, and then you have Charlie who's at 1.8. Let's say Charlie has a low reading level. So what does that mean? As the third grade teacher, you need to differentiate for those three students based off of their reading level. And how are we going to scaffold for Charlie to get him as close to grade level as possible? As you can see, they can be misunderstood and misused. It's the percentiles indicate if the child is above or below grade level average, but does not indicate placement, as I said before, because below 50th percent can look like they're below grade level, while above 50th percentile will look like they're above grade level, and that's not necessarily what it means. So we just have to be careful of how we report to parents. Standardized tests are meticulously developed. They can be interpreted on the normal curve. Teachers need to understand the inner workings of standardized exams they administer in order to interpret the results and use the data to inform students and parents and to help them plan, because assessment drives instruction. Thank you, everybody. That concludes this episode of Educational Assessment. You get a break from me for next week. Next week is just a video that I posted. So you don't get to hang out with me next week on here, but I'll speak to you on GroupMe. I'll see you in the discussion boards, and I'll talk to you soon when we go into Module 2. So have a good day and talk to you soon.